Jamila, what prepared you as a journalist to not only be effective on the editorial side, but also be a great businesswoman as well?
Oh my gosh, I don't get asked that question very often. I feel very fortunate because when I was at Wayne State University in Detroit, one of the parts of the journalism program was media management, which also had a lot of business built into the courses. And I realized probably in the middle of my career that I was one of the few people who had business management as part of my education. And then I also had a lot of executive leadership training, which also had a lot of business strategy. And part of that comes from working in a lot of corporate environments. And being in a corporate environment, the business has goals. You know that you get your revenue goals every year, you get your budget, and you have to manage your P&L. And that is just part of your day-to-day as you transition and move up into executive leadership. But I didn't realize how vital it was to have great business strategy and management expertise very, very early in my career. In fact, when I was still in college. And I see that a lot of people have to go back and get an MBA, whereas I was able to make a shorter transition just through executive leadership training. But I think that's kind of a different pathway because you're an independent business owner. I mean, what were some of the ways that you were able to understand business?
I think mentorship has been pretty important, although I love that one of our guests so outspokenly says that she doesn't believe in mentorship, Fawn Weaver. But, I feel fortunate that I did have some individuals who had made the mistakes already, and I was able to lean on them a little bit and say, hey, I've never experienced this before. And not that my experience is different than their experience, but they can give me some awareness and some insight of how potentially to navigate a difficult situation. But, college didn't prepare me for this at all. It's really been in the act of just doing and learning on the go, and then having really reliable, I would say, advisors to say, this is a really challenging task. How do I confront this? A big part of that is really, I think it's the Oprah Winfrey quote, surround yourself with people who are smarter and more successful and maybe sometimes more interesting, than you, and have more depth to their life, because it only adds to you. And I think that's what I've been able to do successfully in surrounding myself with people like you. But I think as we think about restaurants, we think about hospitality space, I think, mentorship is always a conversation that comes up. It's come up on the podcast so many times. I've done episodes with iconic chefs who have been in the business for 4 generations, and you can look at the amount of individuals who are alums of them, who've gone on to affect food culture. But I think we have to be intentional about the platforms and the organizations and how we educate and how we support, how we actually be in community with the industry. I think that's just so important. And that's what's exciting about this conversation with Melina and Juliane, who are running 2 organizations who are really helping educate the industry.
I love MAD. It's such an important group in Copenhagen that has spent so much time educating chefs. And I remember one of the first conversations I had with Melina where she said René Redzepi had talked to her about his hope for starting this organization, because so many chefs come into the business wanting to be creative, but not knowing exactly how to run the business or how to read a P&L, that they even need one, how to separate your food costs. And that responsibility had been placed onto another person who probably went to finance school, and the chefs were often left out of those conversations. So they talked about the need to have business partners and being able to understand how everything was working, how to pick a good investor, how to have good partnerships, and also that mentor, someone you can turn to and say, here, I need help. Here are the things that I'm thinking about. Here's where I need support. And then watching those cohorts of chefs come together and see what they need to run their restaurants, how they can connect and network and meet other people from around the world who are not only like-minded, but also might be facing the same challenges,
Yeah,
also
boy.
want to be extraordinarily creative. So I think when you think about the running the business, what does progress look like? It's no longer the chef being completely at the behest of maybe their business partner, but being very informed about the ways that the business can be run and the ways that the business can be effective, as well as our conversation with Juliane about what's next on sustainability. Sustainability, not only from a climate perspective, but also sustainability from a business perspective. We want for restaurants to be able to survive, last, make significant changes, and know what they need to exist in the future. And I think both of our guests who are upcoming are looking at ways that restaurateurs, the hospitality industry, people can be in community in a completely different way.
You're listening to Effects of Change, a Bon Appetit and On the Pass original series about progress, co-hosted by Jamila Robinson, editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit, and myself, Gabriel Ornelas, creator and host of On the Pass. Now let's hear from Juliane Caillouette Noble, Managing Director of the Sustainable Restaurant Association.
Starting with this idea that it says on the tin, what does it mean to be a sustainable restaurant, and to bring an organization of like-minded restaurants together, growing in awareness when it came to understanding sustainability. You started to see an increase in things like the sale of organic products and consumer desire for labeling on food products. And yet it was so interesting that when it came to restaurants, people were making choices entirely based on vibes and kind of go into a restaurant and dependent on, honestly, things like greenery in the restaurant would give you an indication of what you thought the sustainability of that restaurant would be, or what the quality of food that was being served, where it was being sourced. And people were making assumptions. And at the same time, restaurants were coming at it by saying, what are you going to do about plastic? What are you doing about your recruitment? What are you doing about 1,000,001 issues? And so the SRA really set up to be a hub to forge those conversations, create a shared vocabulary around what these issues are when it comes to addressing sustainability in a restaurant. Our food system is incredibly complex, and a restaurant basically touches on every single major sustainability or social or economic issue that we're facing globally. So when you look at things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals and you map those and you go, all are actually applicable to the hospitality industry, but nobody's really breaking it down that way for chefs and helping them see what their role is in influencing change in each of these areas. And as we have grown, we have started to recognize that these conversations are increasingly global. The challenges are shared, and that we need to start having these conversations cross-culturally. The first kind of core pillar for sustainability in our industry is around sourcing and the supply chain. And I think for us, we have broken that down into 4 key themes. So the first one, we talk about celebrating provenance. And this is all about where food comes from, traceability, understanding that relationship with the farm, understanding the principles and standards you are going to put into place in your supply chain, what those agreements are going to look like, etc., all comes into that provenance of the food that you are serving. The next, we talk about restaurants supporting farmers and fishers. So this might seem kind of obvious because we're sourcing food from these people, but most of our hospitality system is no longer really built with the farmer or fisher's interest at heart. So when we talk about supporting farmers and fishers, yes, we're talking about making good choices and where you're sourcing those things from, but we're also talking about what do those supply chain agreements look like? Are you paying decent wages? How much of that goes back to the farming community? Are those relationships direct or are they through middlemen? That kind of wider supply chain. We also talk about the global commodity products a lot within there. So whether we like it or not, or want to own up to it or not, our food system is a globalized food system. And we are incredibly reliant on products that are global commodity products like coffee, as an example. So this is where we would talk about is your purchasing of coffee, which at a purchasing level is so divorced from caring about the farmer. Does it have the farmer's best interest at heart? And then the next kind of thing in that supply chain and sourcing when we come to sustainability is thinking about more plants and better meat. So this is something that comes up a lot with sustainability and is thrown around increasingly so, right? With these issues around eating less meat, what does that look like? And I think the vocabulary that we are trying to create with chefs is that it's not this dogmatic, all meat is evil approach, but instead a conversation to say, we need to increase the amount of plants in our diet for our health, but also for the biodiversity of our planet. So we're losing species at an increasingly alarming rate. Loads and loads of evidence shows that the more that we increase the biodiversity of our diets, then the more we value biodiversity in our farming. And you get this kind of virtuous circle where our health improves, as does the health of the soil, etc. So it's really important that we increase the amount of plants in our diet. And then the better meat aspect of that is to say that globally, particularly in the global north, particularly in the West, our diets are over-consuming meat. And there's nuance within this conversation, but one of the key aspects is that with the amount of cattle we're farming, we're also spending a lot of land area growing grain to feed cattle. So we really need to shift to be thinking about better meat products. So again, that's in that shared vocabulary. And sourcing, the final kind of aspect of that sourcing thing is talking about fish in that same sort of context. So sourcing seafood sustainably, what does biodiversity look like for the ocean, etc. Now we've transitioned to the next key pillar being the social impact of our industry. And this is one where I think people aren't necessarily always thinking that this is a sustainability issue, but treating people fairly within our own industry, treating staff fairly is fundamentally a sustainability issue for the sustainability of our industry. Do you know what I mean? If we want to continue to have a hospitality sector where people can have jobs and thrive in those jobs, we need to make sure that we are building good jobs for people. Then you get into feeding people well. So that social impact, restaurants have a huge role to play on influencing our diets. So sustainable diets, health, nutrition, thinking about that, what falls in there. Supporting the community is that final third piece. Restaurants are a unique place within our cities, within our communities. They have a role to play in building culture. So what does that look like? And how do we incorporate our thoughts around what we're doing for our communities as part of our sustainability strategies? And then finally, you get to that environmental impact of your actual restaurant operations. And that's where we talk about things like food waste. We talk about thinking circularly and reducing packaging, shifting our thinking around how we design restaurant spaces, and reducing our carbon footprint, our energy use, all of that sort of stuff within our restaurant. We've been historically, as an industry, we're great at sharing ideas, getting inspired by each other on menus, on social media, all of these sorts of things. But we're trying to now elevate so that we're talking about some of the other parts of the industry. Things as simple as, how do we save energy in our restaurants when these are energy intensive spaces? Or how do we get chefs to shift to not cooking over gas anymore, because that's what the future of our cities might require? So having the stories of those that have done it that can say, actually, I've transitioned, I've put induction into my kitchen, and here were the benefits to my team. Beyond the reduction savings, we actually found that our kitchen was quieter than it used to be, and nobody needs to shout anymore. And the temperature within our kitchen is lower. And so actually, when there was a heat wave in London, we didn't need to close because it wasn't unsafe working condition. You know what I mean? And so when you're getting those stories, you're sharing them. And we serve as a conduit in many ways, where it's not, hey, I, Juliane, am the expert and I want to tell you exactly how you need to be a more sustainable restaurant. It's I, Juliane, hearing stories and challenges from everyone all across the world And I'm going to help connect you to someone else to hear how they might solve it, and perhaps we can solve it together. In many ways, those are the types of restaurants that we really love and love to work with. One of the core offerings that we have and is an audit for restaurants. And out of that, we give restaurants an accreditation, but the main thing that we give them is an action plan and a step forward. So not just saying yes, no to your questions, but hearing what your next steps could be. So it's great that you're doing this. This is your next step. And that then could be across our entire framework. And the big transition for us was globalizing that and making that accessible to restaurants around the world, which meant quite a lot of work to make sure that you're taking out legislation, you're making it applicable to suit different contexts. You're not penalizing restaurants because infrastructure doesn't exist, for certain things. But I think more broadly and kind of beyond what we're trying to offer for the industry, I think how to be in community with us can extend far beyond that. So even without doing the complete audit, we're talking about the importance of this shared vocabulary around sustainability and these kind of key markers and key moments. And we love to hear that restaurants have been inspired to think about a part of that framework that previously wasn't thought about without ever necessarily signing up or going through the process with us. I was in Colombia and I was at a restaurant, and the restaurateur was telling me that he had followed our work for a really long time and that he had shifted to a water filtration system and tap water within the restaurant instead of using bottled water. He had installed solar panels on his roof and all of that. And it was coming from being in dialogue on things like social media. So there are other tools as well to ensure that we're building that story in that community. Humans 100% have the capacity to create the solutions that are needed to solve the challenges that we are facing. We have the power to create change if we can harness it and push it in the right direction. And when it comes to our food and our farming system, what really inspires me is how much we're shifting towards understanding the importance of regenerative farms and of bringing back nature. And I think that's becoming more mainstream than we might think. So I'll give you some examples. In the UK, McDonald's is one of the biggest funders of research of what regenerative farming will look like, because even McDonald's recognizes that their supply chain is going to need to shift to more regenerative models. McCain's Chips has just invested in supporting their potato farmers up and down the UK to invest in better soil health. These are mainstream shifts towards protecting nature and investing in soil quality, soil health, in a way that is transformational at the end of the day if we're doing this on a big scale. There's this amazing sense that actually nature can recover itself. Also, we can invest in these better systems. So that inspires me as something that we can see changing in front of our eyes. It also inspires me the way that just the conversation, full stop, right? The fact that we're talking about things in restaurants in a way that we absolutely weren't, even at the start of my career. So the conversation has shifted so dramatically that if you can think of the pace of the change that we're experiencing right now, fast forward that another 5 years, that's going to be really exciting where we're going to be in 5 years. And I think we need to have that hopeful point of view about our industry. I would like to see circular systems coming out of our restaurants. So I would like us to be thinking much more about how are we collecting our wine bottles back at the end of service? There's an amazing company here in London that's called Sustainable Wine Solution that's working with these vineyards across Europe, but bringing wine in bulk into London. And then it has a circular bottle scheme. So restaurants can purchase the bottles, they put them out, they get collected almost like a milkman, and they go back, they get refilled and rebottled within London without going back to the vineyard. These are amazing shifts in terms of cutting the carbon emissions of our food system, in terms of bringing closed loops. And I think that's really achievable. And I think if we could shift to much more circular thinking in our restaurants and have a food system that felt circular, that's very exciting. And then what that looks like from a food perspective and a menu perspective, there's this really young chef working at a restaurant in London called Ozone. And he was talking about how he writes the first half of his menu, and then he looks at what byproducts are going to be created when we're cooking that. And then how can we create the second half of our menu based on that? So that's a really simple kind of circular idea that other chefs can take on board, where you stop and you go, okay, well, let me prep that. We're going to have trimmings from this piece left over. We're going to create frothed milk that then needs to become cheese, whatever. And you design the rest of the menu based on that. Circular ways of thinking. And then when I think about the impact that I want our organization to have, it keeps coming back to that sharing of stories. Share as much as possible when someone overcame a challenge, or when someone's like, you know what, we figured out what we could do with our potato skins and we changed it in this way. We want to get those stories out as much as possible so that you are informing and sharing better practice across the world. And I think if that's a global conversation in 5 years, then we will be very excited. What I want people to say about the Sustainable Restaurant Association is that we played a role in connecting people to each other and to good ideas and solutions. We all are educated in this field, all that, but it's not at all about our expertise. It's about the connections that you can build. It is the fundamental role we want to play. So we know up here that at this high level, we need to reduce our meat consumption, let's say, as an idea. What do those actions look like? Well, how many options do you have on your menu that aren't meat? And then not only that, what are you doing to promote them and to increase the sales? How are they labeled on your menu? Did you by chance know that evidence shows that if those dishes are listed on the menu higher than the meat dishes, that there's more likelihood that they'll be ordered? Do you know what I mean? So you're really breaking it down to these tangible in-between steps. So you're not just stuck in the, oh gosh, we need a future that looks like this, but we don't actually know what we need to do to get there.
Now let's hear from Melina DiPietro, Executive Director at the MAD Foundation.
Change is very much part of MAD's DNA. We understand that there is constant evolution as individuals, as an industry, and as an organization. We exist to encourage people who are working in hospitality to dare to make a difference and to give them the tools, the skills, the perspectives they need to do so. That's how we approach change. We know that every individual has an important role to play, and that when you add up everyone working in hospitality, we can make a really significant difference. The name is fundamental to who we understand ourselves to be as change makers. Mad in Danish means food, but we don't say it the Danish way. We say it in this British American way. We say it in the way of meaning we're wild about something, we're passionate about something, we're in love with something, and we're also fed up with the status quo, because that's the way we feel about food. We're in love with the places that people working in hospitality create and the incredible contributions they make to community and economy and culture, and also know that the status quo needs to be changed. So that's the type of passion we bring to our work. And we want everyone to understand both that passion and the impact that we can have and that we need to have as an industry. I was living in the States. I'm an American. Copenhagen as a future destination for the rest of my life wasn't on my radar. And fine dining, quite honestly, wasn't my passion. And because René Redzepi of restaurant Noma founded MAD, MAD in my mind, inaccurately, I must say, stood for fine dining. And what happened in the summer of 2015 was René and I met and we started talking about the change he hoped to create in the industry. And he said, one thing that really stuck with me, he said, it's when we're in community that we can make change, right? So that we can do it together, that we're inspired by one another, that we learn from one another. At the same time, he published that summer in Lucky Peach an article about his own experience with anger management and his need to do better. My younger brother was 28, leading a restaurant in Sterling, Virginia, and quit his job a month after his first daughter was born. And it turned out, as we dug deep and I understood what he had not been sharing over the last weeks and months and year in that job, was the owner was verbally abusive. When I learned that and understood that my 28-year-old brother was facing the same challenges in a neighborhood restaurant that some of the leading chefs of our time were facing in their own institutions, I thought, maybe this Copenhagen thing is worthwhile for the type of change we can make. So that's where it got me on a really personal level, big picture, on a statistical level. And this is something I think it's taken the world a few years to catch on to, but now we're very clear that food systems, like how food is produced, how it's distributed, how it's consumed, including through restaurants, has a huge role to play in climate. And it's 29% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's 70% of biodiversity loss. And so that's a real place we can make change when we look at the natural world and the world that gives us so much. At MAD, when we think about change, first we think about harnessing all that potential and helping as many people in the industry become as part of the solution as possible. That said, we know there are no silver bullets, right? This is a tall order. The people we work with are curious and they're innovators. They might come from a Michelin-starred restaurant or a school canteen. They might be serving lunch at your workplace. But what they have in common is this curiosity. And so when they come to MAD, many of them join our 5-day intensive at the MAD Academy. It runs on 2 tracks, one leadership and business, the other in environment and sustainability. And what we aim for them to leave with is real tools that they can use immediately upon returning to their restaurants to change either workplace behavior or the way they engage with the natural world. What are the easy, clear, actionable ways you can make a difference to your team? What are the same easy, clear, actionable ways you can make a difference to nature from wherever you sit in your restaurant? I like you framing it as a realignment of values. When I entered this work and we began talking about a new need for interacting in restaurants, people were curious about how to run restaurants without yelling. But I would be in sessions where amazing chefs at the end, chefs, owners, GMs, would pull me aside and say very privately with real concern, I want to be different. I don't know how. And quite honestly, I'm concerned my team won't respect me if I don't yell. And that was people talking from the heart, right? That was people who had a set of skills that they had been trained in. Yelling is not a skill we want people to practice in the future. So the question for us was, how do we shift that behavior when it comes to workplace values? With environment, it's also similarly a set of realigning values. There we look more to the inspirational and to the practical. What are skills people can use? And I just want to underscore that change on all levels is essential. And some people will choose to start first with the leadership piece, and others will choose to start first with the environmental piece. We want people to do it all, but they need to pace themselves. When I think about the word, as you said, is so overused and so weighted right now in our time. And people are talking about COP28, and they're talking about Scope 1 and Scope 2 and Scope 3 and the Paris agreements, and maybe we should be eating local or maybe not. And that can be so overwhelming. What I love knowing is that the people who attend our programs report leaving more confident and more clear on how they can make a difference. And that's, if they're owners, they understand where the most effective levers are for them. And if they're employees, they often leave understanding how to frame the change they want to make in numbers that will count for their manager or their owners. So in terms of how we think about this, on one level, we know in the world we have right now, hospitality has not been at the table in terms of creating policy or creating the approach to food systems. And we do know that actually restaurants make a difference to how we eat. That is why we've all been eating kale salad, right? So restaurants started serving raw kale salad, and now you walk into the grocery store and you can find packaged bags of kale to eat for dinner. So how do we use the incredible creativity, the clarity of flavors, the skill of hospitality in innovation and in problem solving? How do we use that for food systems? They need to be at the table because hospitality can show us how delicious sustainability can be. So that's our starting point. And that's at the social level. At the restaurant level, at a pure economic level, it can make good sense, right? This is where you get staff retention. This is where you get customers walking in the door. 74% of millennials, 72% of Gen Z consumers are willing to pay more for sustainable products and services. And this goes back to the values alignment, where even in challenging times, I do think we're seeing people stepping forward and making a difference. As we build this framework at the restaurant level, that it can make good economic sense, we ask people also to look at where are the spots in energy, in material use in the restaurant, in your ingredient sourcing, where one change can make a difference. One example would be if you're an operator in California, water is a major concern. The pricing of water is a concern. What happens when you put in low flow water aerators, fix 3 leaky faucets? Suddenly you can be saving, in a 70-seat restaurant, you can be saving 2,000 gallons of water a day. Same size restaurant, what if you reduced or replace a beef portion, reduce it by 50 grams, get it just in line, like a slightly more healthy portion size, or up the level at which you're serving delicious vegetables? A 70-seat restaurant, spread that out over impact over the course of the year, it's the equivalent of taking 8 cars off the road. And you get that adding up over people, over time, over places. And that's where I think we can make a difference. Most people come to this profession out of a desire to care for people and with a sense of purpose. And we have to do a bit of schooling, actually, to say it is okay to make money. And the reason to make money is to take good care of your team, to meet your own goals, to take good care of the earth. But it starts by understanding the business fundamentals. Absolutely essential to the change we're seeking. So we have a very inspirational business coach who spends time with our program participants doing role plays. And in those role plays, they're learning how to manage conflict. It sounds incredibly simple. And yet it's not until you've practiced the role play that you can really have a new set of ways to respond. That's one. Learning communication models is another way. We had a great consultant in last week, expert within Denmark on building diverse teams, creating psychological safety. Change is so much in our DNA. There is so much more I want to do. At this point, we're 36 months into creating this program. We have 700 alumni out in the world. I'd like to keep them connected by a strong and robust alumni network. I absolutely see the need for us to do some type of digital learning. We see how much need, how much desire there is. Last week, when our 5-day program ended, so many of the participants came up to me and said, "Thank you for this experience. We need to make sure everyone in hospitality has this. Can you come to Ecuador to teach? Can you come to Houston?" So I would love to build the capacity for more in-person intensives, but at the same time to build some type of digital learning experience. That's something we can do with resources. We're a nonprofit. Most people are coming on scholarship. And so we're actively planning for the future now. And then we're always in dialogue with the industry to understand what's most relevant and what's most pressing right now as people face today's challenges. Labor, food costs, supply chain, as you mentioned. These are the challenges of right now. We frame it in the very first day when we welcome people. We remind them that though this experience is magic, it is also not magic, right? It is not a silver bullet. You don't suddenly walk through our doors, then exit the same day as a perfect leader or the perfect ambassador for the environment. That said, we ask people to choose one thing they'll work on from the get-go. And then this is why, Gabriel, your points are very much why I want to build out this alumni network. People are doing incredible work, keeping in touch, sharing knowledge through informal WhatsApp groups right now. If we had dedicated resources, how could we elevate their voices? How could we better share the change that they're doing? And probably we can learn something from both of you and your experiences. Do you remember during the pandemic, people were concerned that no one would ever go back to restaurants again? And now the demand for restaurants in most major cities, and I think also in smaller ones, is enormous. People want to be there. They want to have that joy. And I do think the pandemic brought forward that it's often challenging to work in restaurants, that some of the challenges we talked about today mean that there's been less joy in the service or the working of restaurants. And I think this moment in time, this values realignment, it's about making sure that the joy doesn't flow only in one direction from the worker to the guest, but that it is also shared by people who work in hospitality. And that in turn is going to enrich our communities, enrich our cities, inspire us all. You know how nice it is after you've had a great dinner out. On the best days, you feel like you can conquer the world after that, or at least go home and face the pile of laundry. So we need the joy of hospitality on every level, and we need the people working in hospitality to be nurtured by that. If you've come to our programs, I want you to say, that experience changed my mind, gave me new skills, and introduced me to people I'm still in touch with a decade later. If you've become a donor or a corporate sponsor, right now at this point in our life cycle, I want you to be able to say, yeah, we took a bet on this nonprofit that seemed quite new, different, visionary, and it's paying off. We're seeing the difference in local restaurants. We can tell we're making a change that's adding up. Being in community happens on multiple levels. Some of it is who you are working with every day. You want to feel like they are pushing with you. And when I think about it on the MAD level, I believe in actually a very global community. And that would hopefully complement your everyday. And it's a set of people who are constantly striving to do better. And while they might want the next Michelin star, they want more than the next Michelin star. They are the set of people who are looking out for their colleagues. They are the set of people who are looking out for the future of our industry and for the well-being of the planet. In the world right now, it is easy to get caught up in uncertainty and the challenges of this time. When we look at what's actually going to help people make a difference on climate in particular, the human enablers of this are community. They are feeling a sense of shared burden. Someone's in this with me, and feeling a sense that your actions count. And organizations like MAD can provide that sense of community. And then you get a little bit of momentum and you start moving.
On the next episode of Effects of Change.
If you see people who look like you, it feels as if these awards and this work is more tenable and more accessible to you.
We're the facilitators. We're the people that, put this thing together and produce the results and hold it up and, capture the attention of the world's press.
Our whole mission is to support, encourage, enable a more equitable and sustainable food world and food system.
It's really heartwarming when you see people making these connections around the world outside of 50 Best, and that they've become friends.
Effects of Change is produced by myself, Gabriel Ornelas, edited, mixed, and mastered by Dylan Agajanian, with original music by Dylan Agajanian.